Welcome back into the Lions247 Podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. We are into Penn State's bye week of the 2023 season, so there's no game to look ahead to this Saturday. The Nittany Lions, ranked number 6 nationally in the coaches poll and the AP Top 25, return to game action on October 14th. It's homecoming, mid-afternoon kickoff against UMass, and then you know where it's headed after that, Columbus and the rest of the Big Ten schedule. We bring in Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen right now. They were fresh out of Evanston, Illinois, where they spent some time watching Penn State ultimately beat up on Northwestern 41-13. As we covered in the postgame podcast, it took a lot of work to get to the point where this one was a blowout, and they were covering the spread 10-10 at the halftime, 10-3 Northwestern deep into the second quarter. Mark, Daniel and I spent some significant time when he was still inside the stadium, breaking things down on our postgame podcast Saturday evening. Love to hear from you. Just some general feedback from game number 5, Penn State winning that one 41-13.
Well, first of all, bye week doesn't mean an off week, even for us, I suppose. So we're still grinding, but that's part of what happens during the season. You know, if you go back and look at our predictions for that game, I think 90% of our expert panel, people get upset when we say expert panel. Certain people do. They don't realize that we're kind of having fun with that. But I think most of us mentioned we had some twist on an 11 a.m. Local kick between in front of a mostly empty stadium, and what sort of impact that was going to have coming off of the whiteout. And I think it had a greater impact than even a lot of us expected. I mean, there clearly was a letdown offensively. And, you know, I've been to enough games out there and at some of these stadiums in the Big Ten where there aren't a lot of fans and it's an early kick. And I'm not saying it's right. You know, I think that falls a little bit on the coaching staff. I think it falls on the leadership of the team. But ultimately, you know, defense travels. The defense played well for the majority of that game, and I think once again put the offense in position to do what it needed to do when it needed to do it and put that game away. The one thing, you know, I think we spent the first 4 weeks of the season, at least I have, kind of rationalizing the lack of explosive plays from the running game. And I don't think we can do that anymore. I mean, I think it's clearly an issue, something that they really have to focus in on. You know, Northwestern obviously was doing some things to take away the running game, but that was, again, that was the worst rushing defense in the Big Ten. And if you can't get it going, no matter what they're doing with the amount of talent you have, that's a problem. It wasn't a problem in that game, but it will be a problem at some point when you go up against the bigger teams in the Big Ten. Or if you're playing in Ohio State and you have a lead and you have to put the game away. We've seen that happen in the past where they've been unable to do that. So it's really, I think we're done making excuses for that lack of explosive plays from the running game, and it's something that they have to really address. Listen, I get that they have this string of 30-point games. I get that they're leading the Big Ten in scoring. I get that they're outscoring their opponents by an average margin of more than 30 points. That's all fine, and they've done some great things. But I think when you start to look into the certain aspects of this team or certain aspects of what makes a team a Big Ten title contender and a potential college playoff participant, that running game and getting explosive plays from it, I think, is key. And then obviously, I know Daniel touched on it in his final VIP takes, not inability, but the lack of a third receiver or a second receiver stepping up and establishing themselves behind Keandre Lambert-Smith. I think it's really imperative for Harrison Wallace to get healthy. You know, he was out there, he warmed up, he looked like he was playerish, like he could have gone, but he didn't. And maybe they felt they didn't need him, and maybe they're erring on the side of caution. But I think now, even though you're coming out of this bye with UMass, I think it's time to get him back in the mix, because clearly, yes, you're getting production from your tight ends. They're starting to get more production from their running backs. I like what they've done with Nick Singleton in the passing game, but you need other people to step up. And then one last thing, you know, that game was trending toward another disaster for special teams. And Falcons stepped up and hit a big field goal at what was when that was still a game. I never got the sense Penn State was going to lose that game, but I think seeing that kid step up and hit a 47-yard field goal was really important. And then for them to stuff the fake punt, I thought that was big too. And I thought both of those things were big, not just in the course of that game, but for those special teams, because prior to that, you have a fumbled kickoff. You just it's one error after another with the special teams. So I think to come out of that on a little bit of a positive note was good for the special teams, but they really have to carry that on. And I think there's a lot of work for Stacey Collins in that group to do during that bye week. So I don't think we really have to get into the defense in terms of takeaways, because the defense was what it's been, but those are the things that really stood out to me. The other thing that's amazing, I think I don't have it up here now, but I think Penn State's now covered in 10 of 11 games, which is unbelievable. And that one was a push. So we can talk all we want, but they're winning, and Penn State's getting it done by a margin larger than what even Vegas is expecting in most instances.
Just a few things, Mark, because you laid a lot on the table there.
Yeah.
I've said this since September 2nd. It feels like Penn State's playing three teams in one every time they get the field. It's whoever they're actually physically facing that day, starting off with West Virginia, most recently Northwestern, and then it's Michigan and Ohio State. People are keeping a side eye on what the Buckeyes or Wolverines are doing that same Saturday. How impressive do they look? How early are they putting away their opponents? How are their quarterback situation developing? Where are the possible Achilles heels? And so it's on and on and on until these teams finally actually face each other. And we're very close to that now. We're into October. And just going back to Harrison Wallace, I mentioned this on the podcast, but I think it goes worth saying again. His 10 receptions, which were through the first two games of the season, remain the second highest total in that receiver room at the bye week. You got Keandre Lambert-Smith, who I think is 25 catches on the season, right there, right around there. And then Harrison Wallace with those 10 catches that he had through 2 weeks. And then I think the next highest is 7 or 8. So it's something that we'll address momentarily as well. We heard from all three coordinators from Penn State here on a Tuesday. As Mark said, it's not an off week around here either at Lions247. Mike Yurcich, Manny Diaz, and Stacey Collins. We'll talk about each of those in a little bit. And we also have Tyler Calvaruso to break down some recruiting things for us on this episode. But Daniel, you've been patiently waiting. I wanted to throw it to you here to talk about your rewind. You put this up after each contest, and you had a chance after your journey home from Illinois, and we didn't have to sit down on a podcast on a Monday, so you've had a bit of room to digest what you saw in the press box and on the rewatch. Let's start off offensively. What were your biggest takeaways from that 41-13 win?
Yeah, I think I have to echo what Mark brought up about the wide receiver situation. I think starting from a positive, I mean, I think that Keandre Lambert-Smith has looked the part as your number one, as your top guy. He's got more catches than he did in 13 games last year. I think he's 17 yards or in that neighborhood short of where he was last year, and he has one fewer touchdown. And that's through 5 games compared to 13 games last year. So, I think that he is someone who has really, really picked up that level. We've heard a lot of things about him becoming more consistent. And I think that, consistency is something that can be really hard to measure. And I think that sometimes people just give lip service to it. It's easy to say like, we're just going to be consistent. But, to actually see it from Keandre Lambert-Smith, I think has been a really, really big boost for Penn State. But then after that, I mean, the stat where Harrison Wallace is still second among wide receivers in catches, despite, not playing / barely playing for 3 games. I think that that's something that you raise your eyebrows at, going back and watching some of the throws and the misses that Drew Aller had to his wide receivers, I think was something else that was pretty alarming to see at this juncture. Earlier today, Mike Yurcich was asked about it, and he said that it is a concern. It's something that they really, really want to get fixed. But I think my one takeaway from going back through is that you can still see the framework and the infrastructure for this offense to really be successful. To break off some big runs, to be explosive. I think that everything, all the ingredients are there. I just don't know what the catalyst is going to be, whether that's more downfield throws. Maybe it takes Nick Singleton just, making one guy miss. making that last guy miss that he hasn't quite seemed to be able to do this year. Maybe it's even a trick play at some point. Like I think the ingredients are there. There just needs to be that one last thing, I think, to really kick things into gear.
I wanted to quote something from James Franklin in his post-game presser on Saturday. We'll get James again after practice on Wednesday. We don't have that normal Tuesday press conference because of the bye week setup, but he was directly asked about evaluating Drew Aller in the second half versus the first half after the game. And here was the start of his response. I'm not sure how we finished up. Obviously, it was 18 of 33 for the game, so our completion percentage has been higher. And then here's where he goes, guys. I think there's some things we've got to do in terms of separating on the top of our routes or also being able to run past people. We took some shots that had a chance. I think we dropped one of them that would have been a huge play. He goes on to talk about Aller's ball security, but it wasn't a question about the receivers, Mark. It was a question about Drew Aller's performance. And very quickly, after noting the completion percentage wasn't where they would typically want it to be for the young quarterback, they mentioned that this receiver play wasn't as crisp as it would be required on the road against the Big Ten opponent.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's what it's been all year, right? I mean, outside of that, the first couple games where Harrison Wallace was actually playing, and I think that's what helps make the difference. But multiple guys have been given opportunities now to get out there in Harrison Wallace's absence. Cephas, McLean, I mean, and haven't been able to consistently get it done. And you had, Tyler, what was the stat on Amari Evans in that game with snaps?
Yeah, he had 32 snaps against Northwestern, did not get a target as far as we're recorded in the stats. And then, but you go back the last two games, Mark, it's 70 plus snaps and it's 2 targets for 0 receptions. And this is a guy who had a lot of momentum coming out of spring ball. We were kind of pegging him as a starter or a co-starter at one point, misses the first game, shows up for a 4-yard touchdown in the second half versus Delaware. He's been part of the process out there, but he has not had any production to show for it thus far, really.
Yeah, and that's my point. I mean, guys, 32 snaps is a significant chunk of playing time, and to have 0 targets, and it's not as if Aller isn't looking for people. I mean, so I think guys are getting opportunities and just not essentially getting the job done. I don't think Aller's the problem at all. I don't. I mean, to me, he was bound to have a game where he wasn't just completely on target. What I like is that when he's making mistakes, he's missing it in areas where, the only guy who might have had a chance to get it was his guy. I mean, he's not putting the ball in harm's way. And you could look at 0 interceptions through 5 games, and that tells you all you need to know. They did start to take some more deep shots, but I think what we're hearing from James Franklin is that receivers aren't necessarily doing the things they need when they're out there to get those open looks down the field. So when they're running a route, maybe there's 2 different things that they can do, and they're not maybe taking that deep shot. So yeah, it's up to them because, as we mentioned, the tight ends are doing generally over the course of the season what they need to do. And if you look at Nick Singleton now, he was a guy who was barely involved in the passing game last year, and now he's sitting there at what? Yeah, 3rd in receptions with 13. So again, I mean, you have to be able to get a second, not just a 3rd receiver, but a 2nd receiver. One other point I'd like to make, even though the running game hasn't been what we thought it would be, I think it's extremely telling that Yurcich has committed to it because he realizes they're going to need it. Right now, Penn State leads the Big Ten in overall rushing attempts and rushing attempts per game. So it's not as if they're not trying. I mean, so they are committing to running the ball, and they're grinding it out, and it's paying dividends late in games when opposing defenses are getting tired. But they just haven't had the explosive plays, whether it's in the running game or the passing game. And I know we could dive into that with Yurcich's comments in a little bit.
Daniel, look, there's warts to point to here for an offense that has put up the points, has avoided the turnovers through 5 games. So there's a lot that you like. I mean, it's kind of a counterbalance act when you're unbeaten and you still have to do that self-scouting and you got the external noise. But defensively, I mean, everybody's on the same page right now, whether it's the fan base or the coaches or the players or us in the media. This has looked the part of an elite unit. What did you see going through that game once again? And just some general takeaways from yet another performance where they gave up 1 touchdown. They come up with some key stops near the goal line and generally are able to, again, go deep in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, the Penn State defense is just really, really playing at a high level right now. I mean, I think that you can't do what you did to Iowa every week, even going against a team like Northwestern that isn't that you have a significant talent advantage over. But yeah, I thought that the big thing seeing from that defense that really I think has stuck with me is just how they responded in that first drive where Nick Singleton fumbles. They have to go on the field right away in a sudden change at the beginning of the game when you're not even in the flow of the game yet. And for them to come out and knock Northwestern backwards and hold them to a field goal, I think that was something that really set the tone for the night or for the afternoon and really showed, where this Penn State defense is right now. We saw some more of that 3 defensive end look with Chop Robinson rushing up the middle. And I think that they're just doing a good job of getting everybody involved. I was going through the stats, and they have 3 guys tied for the team lead with 2.5 sacks. And I think that Adisa Isaac isn't a surprise up there. I think he's been playing at a high level. Keziah Izzard is in there. He got those 2 sacks in his return in kind of garbage time at Illinois. But then you look at Zariah Fisher right there at 2.5 sacks as well. He was someone that, as I was watching the game on Saturday live, that he had a couple of reps where I was just like, yeah, he looks really good. He's got a lot of burst. He comes around that edge really well. And I think that it just shows that the depth that you have there and the skill that you have on that defensive line, that, Chop Robinson and Denai Dennis Sutton, each have 1 sack, but to have them not be among your sack leaders at this point in the season, they're up there with quarterback hurries, they're up there with tackles for loss. But you're getting a lot of disruption up front, no matter what juncture of the game it is. And I think that that's something that can really, really win you games. You see it all the time where I guess Monday night, watching the Giants trying to block for Daniel Jones and, they can't keep him off the ground. You can see how about having a pass rush that's able to take advantage of a defensive or an offensive line that has some issues can just really, really change the tone of a game, can just really, really put a team back on its heels and make life miserable. I think Manny Diaz brought that up today too, where he talked about how, they're seeing teams chip them a lot on the edge. But Iowa was one of the teams that did not chip them, and you saw what that looked like. I think that I just come away very impressed with this defense. The secondary, I think, has been playing really well, but the fact that it seems like a lot of times they're not really even getting tested because of what's happening up front. They can get a little overlooked at times, but yeah, I think that just, coming away from going back through the stats and looking at different moments in that game, I mean, this defense is just really, really good. The stats, I think, kind of back up the eye test of what we're seeing. It's a little bit of the opposite of what we're seeing from the offense, where you see that big point number on offense, but the process to get there hasn't exactly necessarily matched up. But when you look at the defense, you look at those stats, and then you compare that to the eye test, and this team's really good.
And more the same on the defensive front, as you alluded to. 10 guys landing between approximately 30 snaps and a dozen snaps. That's been a regular basis going that deep with consistency. And over at linebacker, just for the 4th time in 5 weeks now, Dom DeLuca is the 3rd most active member of that position room. That seems like that's here to stay with Dom DeLuca. Kobe King is the starter at Mike linebacker, but and they've been very pleased with his play. In fact, Manny Diaz said that he felt like Kobe King put together his best performance this past week against Northwestern. He started all 5 games, but he's consistently playing about 50%, if that, the amount of snaps compared to fellow starters Jacobs and Abdul Carter. Manny Diaz attributed much of that to the nickel packages that we've seen with the 5 defensive backs. Daquan Hardy is considered a starter for a reason on this defense, and then you've got just the fact that he's pointing to. I'm sorry, Abdul Carter was the name I'm trying to find there. Abdul Carter is now someone that they feel like can play Mike linebacker in this defense. They didn't want to load him up too much last year. They wanted him to get really good at one role, and now it feels like he has crossed that bridge and he can play 2 different spots with authority if they need. So it's an interesting thing, guys, because you've got guys like Dominic DeLuca, you've got Daquan Hardy, Denai Dennis Sutton, you could say Keziah Izzard. None of these guys are starting, but they're still playing, a lot more than you see Kobe King on the football field. And I think that kind of speaks to what Manny Diaz was discussing today, Mark, is he kept going back to depth. And then we talked about it here on the podcast, but we'll talk about many more. But I think while we're on the subject of defense, the snap counts as we go over them for our VIP piece every week here. It's just every single week. Each position has a bunch of names on it. No one's tagged with too many of these snaps. And you just wonder what exactly that's going to mean, come this matchup against Ohio State or deep into November as everybody's got rusty wheels and maybe Penn State can be flying down the road with a little bit more velocity.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just snaps, too. It's tackles. We touched on this last week, but Curtis Jacobs leads the team with 18 tackles through 5 games. That's mind-blowing. It's a mind-blowingly low number. But why is that? Because if you go further down the list, they have 30 guys with 2 or more tackles. I mean, that's a lot of guys. I know 2 tackles could be somebody getting in and doing something in garbage time, but those tackles that down at the bottom of that list are coming from guys who probably would have them up at the top of the list. I mean, we're not too far removed from games where, Micah Parsons was having 10, 11, 12 tackles. I mean, Curtis Jacobs, I think last year went into double figures a couple times. They are not needing that. And I think that speaks to what Diaz said about the soul of this defense. I mean, you get into these conference calls and we talked to 3 straight coaches, like one after another, and then the strength coach, and everything kind of runs together. But there are a couple things that stick in your head that you remember immediately that you don't have to go back and review. And that soul of the defense, and what Manny Diaz was getting at is these guys are all buying into each other. They're not worried about individual stats. They're worried about winning. And if it takes, the snap counts being spread out the way that you're talking about to get where they need to be, that's fine. And I actually saw it at the end of that game where he said that people, and I'm paraphrasing, you can read a defense, what it's kind of all about when you see the way certain players react when other players do well. And I was on that behind the sideline, walking from one end of the field to the other at Northwestern when Daquan Hardy had an interception. So I was trying to go down because the ball was going one way, and then all of a sudden it was going the other. And I start walking down, and Daquan Hardy runs, into the sideline, and everybody is going nuts. All the defensive players were going nuts for him, toward the end of a game that they clearly were going to win. And I'll take it even further. Nick Singleton was over there. I mean, so everybody was kind of buying in. And I think that's really important in a day and age where so many players are about themselves. And I'm not saying at Penn State, but I just mean in general. So many players are about how many sacks could I get, how many tackles for loss, how many tackles, how many fumble recoveries, all these things. These guys don't care. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm sure they love it when they get the sacks, but so long as they're winning, I think we're genuinely seeing that from this defense, that guys are taking a lot of joy in what the collective is doing, not just individuals. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out when they get into a grinded out game, because I think they're going to have the flexibility to play guys a lot more snaps. But I also think it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out at the end of the season when it's like awards time. And nobody has these monster numbers that we've seen in the past. So this is a unique thing that we're seeing, and it's been really fun to watch.
I don't think this is going to be a defense that goes down as one filled with individual accolades, but I think it's a defense that's going to go on to make a significant amount of fortune in the NFL because there's a lot of big-time professional prospects on this team. And something that we continue on the Manny Diaz conversation, something that he was asked was, who are the first round picks that are emerging? And that's not a question that any coach is going to feel comfortable answering, especially 5 games into a season. But he was comfortable enough to bring up a couple names of veterans that he felt were really helping their professional prospect profile with what they've put on the field through 5 games. And Johnny Dixon at cornerback, defensive end Adiza Isaac, and you spoke a bit about Isaac with that 3-man group at defensive end. I know you're really high on what he's done so far, Daniel, but Johnny Dixon and Manny Diaz went out of his way and said, at some point we got to keep talking about what Johnny Dixon is doing opposite of Kalen King. It feels a little bit about the Kalen King conversation, last October when everyone wanted to discuss Joey Porter Jr. And, you still got Daquan Hardy doing his thing, 2 picks in a 3-game span. Cam Miller obviously is not being taken off the field because Daquan Hardy's out there. He's still getting 25, 30 snaps a game. But to me, Johnny Dixon, his emergence as a guy this staff feels is truly elite, has really done something different for this defense and their ability to bridge that gap from losing a guy like Joey Porter Jr.
It's been even tougher for Johnny Dixon this year than it was for Kalen King last year, because Kalen King was just racking up the PBUs, and I don't know how many Johnny Dixon has off the top of my head, but it's not many. I think that just speaks to what this defense is doing and how well that it's playing. But when we talked to Terry Smith a couple weeks ago, and he's a little bit more open about talking about NFL guys in his room. And he said that Johnny Dixon is an elite cover corner. They're getting the chance to show what he can do this year. I think on top of that, we've talked about the versatility that Dixon has in terms of playing in the slot in some of these different packages, or being kind of even just a pure nickel cornerback. So I think that he's someone who is setting himself up nicely for the next level in terms of showcasing his versatility and being able to be used in different spots on the field, but then producing, and when they do throw at him, making a play like he did against Illinois with that really nice interception. So I think that Johnny Dixon is definitely more of an unsung hero in terms of this defense and some of the names and draft pedigrees that you have on it, especially someone like Kalen King, who was a preseason All-American from some outlets and just a very, very hyped individual. But I think that Manny Diaz, by singling out Johnny Dixon, they know how valuable he is. They know how good he is. And I think that they're very high on him and what he can accomplish this year.
Yeah, maybe Dixon's a fellow top 50 prospect when it's all said and done, a top 60 kind of player. That's pretty special to have two cornerbacks in that mix. But 7 more games and some really significant upgrades at quarterback to deal with along the way as Penn State works its way through this season. And so, look, Diaz talked about, just finishing up here, how much fun these guys are having, fast and loose. The soul, which he referenced being the ability to watch other guys flourish and feel just as good, if not better, for their success as you would for your own. But I think what really stood out coming out of Diaz's conversation was the fact that he really thinks that this group, it just sounds like he really thinks this group has that confidence maybe, and that they didn't necessarily go into the season with, because now it's real. It's not based on kind of the paper stuff. It's not based on the hype. It's based on the evidence. And he said in game 3, with Illinois on the field, or at Illinois, with Daquan Hardy back on the field, and Amin Vanover and Keziah Izzard. He didn't mention those threes return, but during the course of that matchup, he says they feel like they found a spark and they've carried it forward. That 5 turnovers will do that for you as a defense, but he says he felt like it kind of changed the way they have approached everything. Not really, in their practice approach, but in the way they're going about games, a little bit more freer. He said he felt like they may have been kind of tight, maybe playing within themselves a little bit more early on in the season, because perhaps they had all that noise, they had all that stuff surrounding them. They felt the pressure to live up to it. Something changed a little bit there in week 3, and Diaz thinks they had that spark still moving forward. Jumping over to Mike Yurcich, who obviously has a little bit more heavier subjects to discuss, even with the 5-0 record. And Daniel, you were point man for our notes at Lions247.com for these, and we have notes on all these conversations over at Lions247.com today. But Drew Aller was the first subject here, which you'd expect. And really, there's just, you'd imagine Mike Yurcich is really happy about this process and the opportunity to work like a talent, to work with a talent like Drew.
Yeah, Mike Yurcich had a lot of praise for Drew Aller. He was asked a little bit later, has anything about Aller surprised you at this point in the year? And he said that between Drew Aller's early enrollment, a couple spring balls, a couple fall camps, that nothing has really surprised him. There's still some footwork, and it sounded like more nuanced stuff that Aller needs to improve. But overall, Mike Yurcich, I think, sounded pretty happy with his quarterback and what he has done so far. I mean, I think that he brought up the not turning the ball over, that Aller is very patient, doesn't press, doesn't do some of the things that you might expect a younger quarterback, a first-year starter, to do that lead to mistakes. So, I think that he's pleased with what Aller is doing. And when he was, asked about areas where he wants them to improve, it was a lot more subtle things, that's where he got a little more coach speaky, about moving up in the pocket, being more vertical at times. And so, I think overall the early returns are there, from what we've seen Aller do on the field and what Mike Yurcich had to say today.
What I brought up to Mike Yurcich, I'm sure he was anticipating this, was the wide receiver conversation. He was complimentary of what Keandre Lambert-Smith has done, and cashing in on an offseason that by all accounts was a very dedicated one. Keandre Lambert-Smith has looked the part of the lead receiver. He's provided some sparks at times. Last week against Northwestern, you can look at some of those moments. 44 yards after the catch for Keandre Lambert-Smith, who I believe now is 6 of the last 7 games has gone 60-plus receiving yards. He maybe did that 5 or 6 times in the preceding 30 games of his career. So it switched for him. But Mike Yurcich acknowledged, it's something that he said that the clock's ticking in terms of this receiver situation. It's not, the first couple of weeks of non-conference play anymore where you're getting a feel for these guys with a first-year head coach. You're now about to get into the thick of it with Big Ten opponents. And Mike Yurcich made it a priority, it seems, during this bye week, but coming out of it here, I'd imagine against UMass as well, and really figuring this thing out and not allowing it to be a revolving door of auditions. And so I think, Mark, you mentioned it a lot earlier on. We won't spend too much time here at receiver, but we haven't seen these guys under true pressure yet. I mean, each one of them is under pressure to perform because very few of them, even Keandre Lambert-Smith, has proven a ton at the Power 5 level. And now they're all getting their shot with a really high caliber quarterback. But I want to see these guys when it's a tie game or they're down by 4 and there's 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter and you've got to run a crisp route and come down with the ball in traffic. I mean, we have no idea. These guys haven't been tested in that way late in games. You could look at every rep as a test, but quite frankly, when they're matched up against, all Big Ten caliber cornerbacks and Drew Aller has to try to fit into a tight window, we just don't know what this group's, how they're going to respond. And you hope it's not a letdown later in the season. But right now, that benefit of the doubt that maybe you were looking to brew when you had 300 plus yards receiving from this group in week 1, it's just not there. And when you don't have benefit of the doubt and it's still improvement mode here, that's where things get dicey because that Buckeyes matchup is just tick-tock, getting closer, like Mike Yurcich told us.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about proving it against Ohio State. How about proving it against Northwestern or Iowa or Illinois? You know what I mean? I mean, this is, you're at Illinois and, McClain has multiple opportunities and just drops them. I mean, listen, I know these are college kids, but this is big-time football. And you're 5 games into this.
By the way, McClain down to 1 snap right. In Northwestern. He was starter with 45 snaps a few weeks ago. And that's why I say a revolving door of additions where one guy gets the spike and snaps 1 week, then he takes they play second fiddle or takes a step back the following week. And through it all, Steve has 7 targets, 2 receptions. Doesn't feel like someone's seizing the moment when it comes.
Right. And I thought they may take a more of a look at Caden Saunders, and that really hasn't materialized. But, it goes back kind of to what you were saying, Tyler. Listen, when a team's 5-0 and blowing everybody out, you really have to find things to nitpick. And this is definitely nitpicking, but it's nitpicking with the idea that you have to judge how this team is going. If this truly is a contending team, you have to look at the other contenders. I mean, this is exactly what you mentioned earlier. You have to look at, how does this project against Ohio State? How does this project against Michigan? How does it project against a Maryland team that's playing a whole lot better and looking really athletic? I mean, so those are the things. And I think before you worry about, how are they going to do against Ohio State, which is coming up extremely quickly, it's like, geez, they didn't even prove it against not the greatest competition. So they have that receivers room has a lot of work to do. What I will say is I've been really impressed with Keandre Lambert-Smith outside of the couple of personal fouls. But you look at what he did in that Northwestern game. I think he had 4 catches, all for first downs. He had a run for a first down. So what is that telling you? Okay, maybe he's not getting the super long plays, but he's moving the chains. He's getting things done. He's become the guy that if Drew Aller absolutely needs something, he knows he can go to him. I mean, he had that unbelievable catch against Iowa. So yes, you have that. And again, your tight ends are going to be fine. And I love what they're doing with Singleton. but they really need that second, third, fourth guy to step up.
Outside of Lambert Smith and then Harrison Wallace, who you kind of categorize differently here because of what he's dealing with. There's just nobody who's averaged more than 20 yards receiving per game in this receiver group. Dante Cephas, 103 yards on 7 catches through 5 games. And that void has become more glaring, I think, because Theo Johnson hasn't had a monster season. I think we'd be viewing this through a different lens if you say, yeah, but look what Theo Johnson's producing on the offensive end. Theo Johnson right now, 12 catches, 101 yards. That's an 8.4 average per catch. It's about half of what he averaged last year, 16 yards per reception, which led the team last season. And maybe we're waiting for a second half breakout. I hope you didn't miss your opportunity to spur it, Daniel, because last year in October, you asked Yurcich about Theo's usage. And from there on, he was a monster, very productive. But it's something to monitor there. And as we're continuing to talk about the concerns offensively for a team that is 5-0 and puts up a lot of points, running back situation. This is kind of one we figured would be the ground game. You could lean on this if you had to. And they have been able to put some games away, but they haven't carried themselves to wins via the ground game. And we've got Katron Allen's status to monitor. We'll get a look at practice on Wednesday. JB Nelson, Allen, among those guys, we got to see where they're at. But generally speaking, you brought this up with the final question of Mike Yurcich's session here on Tuesday, Daniel, is where do things stand with that group and through these 5 matchups and moving forward?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and maybe I should have asked Mike Yurcich what's standing between Penn State and some of these big gains, these big plays, by Nick Singleton that we saw so many of last year. But I sort of just asked him to evaluate what he's seen from the running backs this year. And he said that he thought against Northwestern that the pass protection was good. I think that that's something that we know that Penn State values, from its running backs, the ability to stand back there next to the quarterback and pick up a blitzer, create some extra time. But then Yurcich said that they're just trying to iron out the finer points of each run and seeing the big picture of what they're trying to do. So, not really a lot of specifics there. I think that we've seen the opportunities. We've seen that this offensive line is opening up holes at various points. Mike Yurcich also brought up the fact that Penn State only had 2 plays that went for negative yards against Northwestern. I think that that's something that, especially last year, Katron Allen was really, really good at, not getting caught behind the line of scrimmage. That's something that I think over time we've seen Nick Singleton really develop with, in terms of him being a little more patient, not instinctively trying to bounce everything outside. I think in September last year, we saw him get caught a couple times trying to do that. So I think that the running game, I don't know how many times we can say that they're due until they're not due anymore, I guess. But Yurcich, I think that he's aware that there's definitely room to grow right there. I think that they know that they have the talent and that they believe they have the talent back there to accomplish some things. But we're really going to have to see it, to really, I think, believe it at this point.
It's just, I think Singleton specifically, he's on pace to end up, right around the same touchdown total. He's got, I think, 7 total touchdowns. He had 14 last year. He's been tremendous in that regard. But under 4 yards per carry in each of the last 4 games. Last year, he finished over 6 yards per carry and a 13-game sample size that included a Rose Bowl and all the Big Ten matchups. So I think that's been, on our message board especially, is kind of, you thought the highlight reel will be pretty full right now for number 10, and it's not there yet. And Mark mentioned he's receiving the ball more. He's got 13 catches compared to 11 last year. But if Katron Allen is going to miss any extended action here, and you love what you've seen from Trey Potts in a limited role, but Nick Singleton, you're going to want to see him start trending more toward what you viewed last year, especially as you've got upgraded defenses to deal with down the road here. And as you're looking for big plays, if they're not going to come from that receiver room, then you start to look at position groups. And Nick Singleton is one that you feel like you could hang your hat on to this point. Nothing over 20 yards. And it's just kind of surprising to see thus far. Before we get over to Tyler Calvaruso to break some things down for recruiting. We did have special teams coordinator Stacy Collins on for a bit on Tuesday. Mark, I'll let you take the baton on this one because you've been talking about special teams since August as kind of your concern here with Penn State if they want to get to the college football playoff and win games there. He brought up kicker. He made it sound like Alex Felkins is in pretty good standing right now, but the competition is ongoing. He says Sanders Sahadak has put together some good weeks of striking the football. Punter, I think the one thing to note here is the scholarship guy that you brought in last year, Alex Paqueta. We were wondering, why isn't he traveling to these games? Is it bumps and bruises? When directly asked, Stacy Collins did not give us any kind of an off-ramp like that. He said it's performance-based based on everything you say. So a little bit of a current concern there where Riley Thompson, obviously coming in as a transfer, has been the guy. Sounds like they feel like he's steadied himself a little bit. And the freshman impact was something that stood out, I think, in utilizing these burned redshirt guys. But, Mark, put it all together, and what did you come out the other side with from what you heard from Stacy Collins?
I like that Audrey Snyder came in hot, like right off the bat, asking him about the play clock violation on play clock violation on the second half kickoff, which I have watched a lot of football. I have never seen that. And Audrey, it was great because that question needed to be asked. I mean, it really did. And it just so happened that was the question she had in mind. I was texting with her, and that was the opening question. And he said, what happens is you got to be able to get to kick off the football before the 25 seconds. I mean, seriously, I mean, we talked about the issues with this team and special teams. And I mean, that kind of sums it all up, right? I mean, how could that possibly happen coming out of the half? I mean, I just don't, where is everything with that? I'll go back to what I said earlier is that, to their credit, the special teams did play an important role in that game. And maybe they can ride that momentum, and maybe being able to take a step back is going to allow them to get some of these things in order. But I just thought, that special teams thing just kind of epitomized some of the issues they have, because it's like you never know what's going to pop up where. And, with respect to the individual kickers, I don't think we got a whole heck of a lot out of Stacy. I mean, he said that he thought it was Riley Thompson's best game against Northwestern. I would agree with that. I thought he did a nice job. And for everything he's saying about Felkins and Sander, it just seems to me as if Felkins is the guy now. I mean, if you're going to trot him out there to kick a 47-yarder, we've seen in the past, maybe if they have a 54, 55-yarder, maybe they'll give Sahadak that opportunity. But I think he strikes me as a coach. He's a really smart guy. And I think he understands that some of these issues that have been popping up just aren't acceptable. And he'll be accountable, and they'll work on it. Because I'm you guys know I've said it, sooner or later, one of these stupid things is going to cost them a game, and you just can't do that. I mean, it's one thing if somebody comes through and makes a great play and blocks a kick, or somebody makes an unbelievable play and returns something for a touchdown. But these self-inflicted wounds, the fumbles, the play clock, I almost called it the shot clock earlier because I'm so confused that I never saw it before. They absolutely have to get that tightened up, and let's see if they're able to do that during this bye week.
All right. Daniel, the other conversation that we had a chance to have was with Chuck Losey, and this is always an enlightening conversation. It's not necessarily what's going on the football field, but what's going on behind the scenes in this premier strength and conditioning program that Penn State has put together. Dwight Galt retired a couple of years ago. He established something very high standard, and NFL scouts always talk about it, and Chuck Losey has really carried that forward. Freshmen are always a subject of conversation, and he had a lot to say about several of them today as this group makes its way through year one on a college campus.
Yeah, I think that we can start with the obvious guys, which is what Chuck Losey did when I believe you asked him about the freshmen, and he started with Tony Rojas. We've made a lot about Tony Rojas's physical development. Listed at 195 on signing day, and was at 230 at one point during the spring. So he's someone who has made that physical development bulked up while keeping those same athletic traits that made him a very well-regarded recruit out of Northern Virginia. And then let's get the notes right here. Yeah, and then we got another Kavion Keys mention. which I believe Manny Diaz did earlier. And that's someone who, or maybe no, I think it was Stacey Collins brought up Keys, and as someone who we haven't seen that much of yet, has mostly been working with the developmental squad, but has some tools, and has made some physical strides. I think that he's similar to Rojas in that he was listed at under 200 pounds as a senior in high school and has now bulked up, I believe, into the 220s. So that's another physical development that's happening. And then the other two that Losi brought up on his own were Elliot Washington, which we know 24 miles an hour. Yeah, 4.32, the whole 9 yards. But he also brought up Ty Blanding, the freshman defensive tackle from New York, and he didn't get here till the summer. And with those guys coming in, to play in the trenches, there's going to be a year, unless you're incredibly blessed, like there's going to be time to make that adjustment there. So we weren't expecting to see much of him, but he made the travel roster for Illinois. Chuck Losi said he's up 15 to 20 pounds while his body fat has gone down more than 5%, which I think is something that you like to hear. Not necessarily for this year, but for the future, that you have someone on the interior. Penn State, I think, has been leaning on a couple upperclassmen there, guys like Devon Elise and Keziah Izzard, who at some point are going to move on, and you're going to need to fill in and have guys ready to go. Somebody else who I asked about, another freshman, was Nittany Lions. In that defensive end group, Chuck Losi was talking about the top three that they have and how impressed he's been with Isaac and Robinson and Dennis Sutton. And so, I asked about Lions because, we've heard good things. He's in that yellow light category. We saw him play early this season, and, Chuck Losi spent a long time talking about him. And he called him a great surprise. Said that, even though that he's a lankier guy, he's really, really strong, 250 pounds, could go up to 265 or 270. So I think that Lions is someone that, got here in the summer, so didn't have that full, January to August stretch to really work. But Chuck Losi, I think the term that he used for Lions and Aller, and I don't know if he used it with anybody else, but he said he expects them to explode this offseason, in the weight room, in that strength program. So I think we covered a lot of ground with Losi, and it's always nice to get that insight on guys that we're not going to talk to and that are probably undergoing the biggest physical transformations of anyone on this team.
Yeah, Blanding was a bit of a surprise, making that trip out for the first Big Ten matchup of the season out in Illinois, making the travel roster. And going back to what he said about Drew Aller, I thought that was notable. It sounds like they're really going to be working on speed work, and it's not something you can necessarily do between October and November in the season all that well. But as they look for the next step in the progression of this 5-star phenom prospect, it sounds like maybe some wheels being added to the mix. I think, Mark, though, we've seen this team in more ways than we anticipated kind of rely on Drew as a rusher. Not some of these short yardage spots. We know what he can do in moving the pocket, but I think that's been a bit of a surprise from the offense for the first 5 games, is just how many of these calls have been specifically seemingly dialed up for Drew Aller to be utilized as a ball carrier.
Yeah, well, some of those have been the quarterback sneaks, obviously.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. But I also think that goes back to kind of what Yurcich was talking about with Aller being able to climb up into that pocket, because what's the next progression after that is that if it opens up, you want to be able to climb into that pocket, look down the field. If nothing's there, hopefully you can take off and gain some of those yards. But I also wanted to talk about those QB sneak situations, because he was asked, I forget who asked him about the tush push and how much pride he got. Boy, he was beaming when about the physical power that you see. And he said, he and his entire staff, when they see that's something special for them, for Penn State to be able to pull off those plays in short yardage, because that speaks to the work that all these guys have done in the weight room. And, Chuck Losi, when he first took over for Dwight Galt, his first couple times with the media, he wasn't real comfortable, which is completely understandable because I wouldn't be comfortable talking to idiots like us either. But ultimately, this guy has become really, really, really good. I mean, if there were people on the beat who weren't on that Zoom, he gives really good insight, like really, really, really good insight on different players. And we're touching on some of it now, but just those little things, like who would have thought as you're looking at Drew Aller that one of the keys to him improving even more is his speed. You know what I mean? I mean, like that's not something that people typically think about with him. But I think that tells you how these strength coaches and these offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators, how they're always not just looking at, it's one game at a time, but they're always looking big picture as well and thinking, okay, where do we take this guy to the next level? And it's no coincidence that you're seeing that pay off in the NFL draft when it comes around, because they're never content with somebody being who they are. They always want them to get better and better and better. And having a guy like Chuck Losey who's going to push them to get better, I think is invaluable. I mean, he was Dwight Galt's right-hand man. And I think they did a really smart thing by elevating him to that top position, because if you look at where this team is testing wise and what it's continued to do in the NFL draft, it's been pretty impressive.
Chuck Losey and his staff, they get to work early with some of these 15, 16-year-olds at the camp, measuring them up, getting the explosive measurements, and then it comes to a culmination several years later with that pro day when you've got 32 representatives from the league watching those guys closely. And I know that's a point of pride. So cool to peel back the curtain a few times per year with Chuck Losey. I highly encourage everyone to head over to Lions247.com today. We'll have full notes from each of these coordinator calls and the conversation with Chuck Losey. We have an updates thread going right now at Lions247.com. We'll have some more content and coverage coming out of this as well. We're back on the practice field Wednesday. We'll get a peek at this team during the bye week. Never quite sure what you're going to see on the practice field during the bye week. So we'll let you know whatever we do see with our VIP practice report afterward. We'll also hear from James Franklin afterward. It's our only chance to hear from him during this week away from game action. Guys, I'll be back with you on the field next week. We got to get to Tyler Calvaruso, and hopefully everyone's well aware. 2 months for $1 of VIP access at Lions247.com. That's 2 months for $1. Takes you through the end of the regular season. Really sets the stage for signing day as well. And I mean, even the transfer portal is starting to open up by the time we're through 2 months. So a lot to look at with that VIP setup. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, with that deal, I'll say that today is October 3rd. And the Big Ten title game is December 2nd. So if you think that Penn State has that kind of ceiling, you can get through those 2 months between now and then.
I knew math would be involved here at some point, and I'm glad it wasn't me who had to figure it out.
Nicely done, Daniel. That's a great teaser. All right, talk to you both soon.
Okay. Thanks, Tyler.
Let's get over to Tyler Calvaruso now and talk about Penn State Nittany Lions recruiting. We were able to do a lot of that last week. We had Brian Doan on for a lengthy conversation, national recruiting analyst with 247 Sports, and we had him fresh off of a spree of 3 commitments in 3 days, Tyler. We caught up with you last Monday coming off of the whiteout. We had a chance to talk about the first of those 2 commitments, but Brady O'Hara, who you have had a crystal ball on for a while and who you've covered quite a bit here on the podcast, has officially climbed the board. We heard from Brian Doan on the subject. Would love to get your take on what they're adding from the top 24/7 Pittsburgh standout. Welcome back to the podcast, my friend.
No, it feels like I spent months saying that it was only a matter of time before Brady O'Hara would join the class, and that time finally came last week. So things came together for Penn State pretty much as it anticipated it would. You know, there was always a lot of confidence inside of Lash that Penn State was going to be able to get the deal done with Brady O'Hara. I mean, really from the start, you know, you just kind of got the feel that Penn State was the place O'Hara wanted to be. I got the chance to catch up with him following his commitment last week, and he was telling me the first time he made it to campus for a junior day in January, he was pretty much thinking it would be really, really cool if I could get an offer from the Nittany Lions one day. At that point in his recruitment, he had only had Pittsburgh and Wisconsin, and he was very, very appreciative of those 2 early Power 5 opportunities. But when he made it to Penn State, it just got around the program, got around the staff, saw everything that Penn State has to offer, or at least got a glimpse of what Penn State has to offer. He kind of knew that if an offer came in, it was going to be a very high choice on his list. The offer comes in a month later in February after his junior day visit, And from that point on, I feel like we could have set the timer, looking back at it. When you go back and read some of O'Hara's quotes coming out of visits and just how complimentary he was of the staff and the way they coach their players and the way they make recruits feel at home when they visit. So, look, it was a perfect storm for Penn State in that regard. Another highly ranked in-state prospect joining Penn State's 2025 class after Taquay Hayes. The Lions always wanted to keep the top talent in the state home. They're accomplishing that with Brady O'Hara.
Yeah, Taquay Hayes out of Aliquippa, the running back prospect, and Brady O'Hara now on board. And of course, along the way there in that 3-day span, you had DJ McClary, top 24/7 linebacker out of New Jersey, joining the class, which just to quickly bring everybody up to speed, along with those three who climbed down in the class after the whiteout, you had Keandre Barker, who's a top 24/7 running back out of Texas, and then Omari Gaines, who's that long-limbed defensive back, also out of the state of New Jersey. So 5 guys on board. It currently ranks 5th overall in 24/7 Sports assessment of the landscape for that 2025 cycle. A long way to go there, Tyler, but with this class more than doubling in such a short period of time, you're curious what's next. And so who are those names on the tip of your tongue when I ask you, who do we need to be aware of if this class is going to grow and if it's going to grow relatively soon?
2 guys I've been coming back to recently are Josh Williams from Haverford School and Kanoa Winston, the cousin of KJ Winston down at Gonzaga High in Washington, D.C. Williams is just another guy who is from Pennsylvania, grew up around Penn State, is from a Penn State family. So he really, really loves the attention that he has gotten from the Penn State staff, and he's high on what Phil Trotwin has been having to say to him and really just Penn State's plan for him moving forward. I've tossed around the idea of a crystal ball pick, but given some of the intel we've received about a potential timeline, it seems like things are still going to play out a little bit. So I'd like to see where things go first. Williams is a very high academic kid. He's very, into his education and putting himself in the best position to succeed post-football. So he's looking at, the academic schools. He's already been to Stanford. Duke offered recently. It seems like, the Blue Devils are in line to get a visit. And Duke, credit to what they've been accomplishing on the field in the recruiting trail as well. They've been playing some high-level football, and they've been getting some notable recruits on campus. So you can't discount Duke. There's an offer out from Cal. So schools of that ilk. But I feel like as things continue to play out and Williams gets around Penn State more, because he visited twice in September, we're going to have to see if he makes it back for another game this year. Maybe late fall, early winter, we start to see things start to wind down a little bit. I think we're going to have to monitor that and see where things go on both sides. But right now, Penn State is trending nicely for the in-state interior offensive lineman. And then with Winston.
Can I jump in on Josh Williams real quick? Can I jump in on Josh? Because as you know, that we were front and center the day he got that offer.
Yes.
We got the chance to meet his family a little bit, have had a chance to continue some conversation in the last couple of months as their relationship with Penn State has grown and the offers have come elsewhere. I wonder if maybe the recruiting process had started for him as a junior, during his junior season, if he wouldn't be ready to wrap it up right now, or if it wouldn't already be done, because he's a guy who coming out of spring, going into the summer, was starting to think his ceiling was going to be Ivy League football. That's a great ceiling for a lot of people, the Ivy League period. But in terms of football, he wasn't really thinking Power 5. That changed in a big way through a series of offers, including Penn State. And so because that accelerated so quickly, and because this family is so smart, I believe Dad, who's a Penn State graduate, also went to school at Harvard to pursue other education. So it's a high academic family, and I think that they are really all about dotting the I's, crossing the T's. If they're going to get on a plane and go across the country to check out Palo Alto and see what Stanford can offer at a time that is not good for that football program, when they know full well what they have at Penn State, and they know full well that after years of watching this program, what it would mean to them and their family to have their son as a Nittany Lion, I think they've been as diligent as anyone I've really come across in the recruiting world, because it would be pretty easy when Phil Troutwine and James Franklin are treating you like a priority, and that has maintained through this season and through their visits, for them to just say, all right, this is what are we waiting for? Let's hug, let's commit. Maybe we get there eventually, and maybe it happens before the end of his junior season. And I should have said his sophomore season when I was talking about last year, if he had been on the radar early as a sophomore versus going on before his junior year. But I think we both feel like this is going to end up where it's at. But it makes a lot of sense why Joshua Williams and his family are operating at the pace they currently are. And unless Penn State changes things up, it seems like this is working out for both parties. And I think you don't have that crystal ball pick in, but I think we're both view it as a lean situation at this stage.
Yeah, and I'm really in 100% agreement with you on that entire sentiment because, some Penn State fans might hear everything we just said about Williams and how well things have gone between the two sides. You're like, oh, well, why isn't he part of the class already? It really just comes down to the fact that Josh Williams and his family, they're very detail-oriented people, and they do not want to leave anything unchecked when making a very big decision about his future. You got to keep in mind, Williams, he's a class president. He's a very, very smart kid. So he knows exactly what he's looking for in the school as he goes on all these visits. And he wants to make a decision that is informed and a decision where he has all the available information on all of the schools involved in his recruitment in front of him. So is this timeline any sort of a surprise to me? No, it isn't. And you know what? Frankly, if his recruitment did kick off a little bit earlier, and let's say all these offers came in the sophomore year, like you were getting at,
right.
We're a year plus in to his recruitment with these offers on the table, he probably would be getting close at this point.
Yeah.
But I think things are going to play out a little bit longer for the reasons that we just laid out. They're going to be diligent. They're going to, see what's out there in terms of on and off the field, and whatever comes of that comes of that. And I think what will come of that, if everything lines up perfectly down the road, well, there's a good chance he winds up as one of the in-state prospects in Penn State's 2025 class if everything goes as well.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you've got an in-state kid who's a home run offer as a freshman. Quentin Martin comes to mind, and now he's committed, and we'll talk about him in a moment. And then you've got a guy like Joshua Williams, who's, you're not even putting out an invite to come to your spring game last year. And there's, a bunch of local kids end up at that spring game. A lot of them aren't going to end up with offers. And so to have his first recruiting experience in Beaver Stadium not come until the first game of his junior season, I think you can respect the pace at which they're working. And I didn't want to spend, 10 minutes here on Joshua Williams, but I just think it's worth noting some nuances here for an in-state prospect. And I do believe that if he were to join this recruiting class, and why you'd love to have it sooner rather than later for the Nittany Lions, I think he will be a really good cornerstone member of the 2025 class in terms of encouraging other players to join this group, in terms of the peer recruiting angle of it. And so he's got that kind of a personality, in my opinion. And I know you had a second name for us.
There is, but before I get to that, there actually is one last little bit that I want to add on Williams. Spots on the interior offensive line in any given recruiting class, they're not plentiful, right? So, we talk about this playing out and it being a detailed-oriented process, but, at some point there's going to have to come a time where a decision is going to have to be made. So that's something that is definitely playing into this whole thought process from Williams and his family as well. Now we're finally getting to Kanoa Winston. I know we had to put him off for a little bit, but we're back on him. He's a top 100 safety who deserves to be talked about plenty. And we've done that here on the pod because he is, given his ties to the program and really everything that he has had to say post-visit, he's a high-level prospect who has some very impressive offers, but it feels like Penn State is standing out above the rest right now. He's another guy who I've toyed with tossing a crystal ball pick in for, but it's kind of the same thought process for me. I want to see where things go in late fall, early winter, because he did make it to Rutgers for a visit. So it's not like Penn State is the only place that he is visiting. The door is open for him to visit other schools as the season progresses. So I kind of want to see what comes about on that front. Maybe he ultimately decides Penn State is the place for him sooner rather than later. I don't think that is a wild thought or something that is unfathomable. I think it's something that could come together for him, but I think this one's going to extend a little bit. And I want to see, once the November, December, January, if he's still on the board, want to see where that goes. But another recruitment where Penn State is trending nicely, and you have to feel that the Nittany Lions are on top for Kanoa Winston right now.
And Brian Doan spent some time breaking down Kanoa Winston and where he stands as well on our last recruiting focus here on the podcast. He's been a kind of a trendy name for the Nittany Lions of late. Looking over to the 2024 class, we also discussed Jalen Harvey with Brian Doan. There's a couple names out there, and one surfacing last week. You wrote about it at Lions247.com, a top 24/7 receiver in the 2024 class.
Yes, Nittany Carr from Georgia. He told us that he is looking at next weekend, the UMass game, as a potential official visit opportunity for him to Penn State. Now, look, I just want to say this before we go any further with Nittany Carr. Quite frankly, I do not think he is going to land at Penn State. I just have the feeling that he's going to land in the South. And Miami is doing really well with Carr now that he is back on the open market, and he's going to be there for an official visit this weekend. And, it really wouldn't surprise me if his recruitment ends this week. And I think Miami has done some really good things with Carr so far. And Ja'Cory Brown is also down there as well, as former quarterback at Colquitt County. So those two have a relationship, and he's been working that one pretty heavily. So I like where the Canes are at with Carr. But look, Marcus Higgins has put Penn State in a position to have a chance. Anytime we start this official visit discussion, there's got to be some level of interest from the prospect. So that's where Carr is at right now. I think if Penn State does indeed get him on campus, it'll be an intriguing chance for Higgins, who I got to give him credit, because really his not even a year on the job, and he has kept Penn State in the hunts with some big name wide receivers. And you also have to keep in mind, coming over from Virginia, he didn't have relationships, or a lot of relationships, with top end guys like this, because, and this isn't a slight at Virginia, they just were not recruiting at that level where he was going to have relationships with some of these guys. A lot of these guys he has gotten to know since he arrived at Penn State, and he has done a really good job of building up those relationships in a short period of time and putting the Nittany Lions in the running legitimately for some of these guys. Will that culminate in commitments? That remains to be seen. It might be an instance where Penn State was a little bit too late to the party, but that's more circumstantial than anything that the Nittany Lions have done. But, Higgins he's doing a good job on the trail so far for the Nittany Lions. I think early returns have been pretty positive for Penn State's first-year wide receiver coach. And Carr, him even entertaining the idea of an official visit, I think, is another example of that. So UMass next weekend, looking like that's when Carr will be on campus. If that doesn't happen, it's possible it happens in November for the Michigan game, which is shaping up to be an absolute monster of a recruiting weekend. I mean, if you guys thought the whiteout was a big recruiting weekend, Michigan game probably going to be even bigger. So that weekend is a potential official visit weekend for Carr. But again, if he goes off the board to Miami this upcoming weekend, wouldn't surprise me in the slightest.
And speaking of wide receivers in that 2024 class, Pierre Gonzalez continues to show that he's all the way back from a 2022 injury. The Penn State commit who validated his offer on the camp circuit this summer and ended up committed before his senior season. First off, him and Quentin Martin. We'll pair those two Western PA guys together, because I know you wanted to focus on their most recent performances out of this group.
Yeah, Gonzalez had a monster game over the weekend, more than 200 receiving yards, 3 receiving touchdowns. And Penn State has been really pleased with what he has put on film so far during his senior season. I don't think there's any discussion about that knee anymore, right? I think he's pretty much back to 100%, back to what he was before, the knee injury that sidelined him for a large chunk of time and, cost him time on the camp circuit as an upcoming recruit. That's kind of why things came together a little bit later here in Gonzalez's recruitment when it came to when his commitment to Penn State was, handed down. I think that this spring was a proving ground for him on the camp circuit. And me and Brian Doan got the chance to see him in New Jersey at that UC report camp, and he ran really well and tested really well. And from that point on, I think that alleviated any potential speed concerns coming off the knee injury. I think a lot of staffs, Penn State included, want to see how he ran coming off that injury, and he squashed that in a hurry with some of the 40-yard dash times he posted and the track times that he posted as well. But now that the pads are on, that athleticism that showed and flashed on the camp circuit, it's still there. It has not tailed off in the slightest, and Peter Gonzalez has done a very good job of being a top option for Central Catholic on the outside. And another aspect of Pierre Gonzalez is, he's drawing a lot of attention from opposing secondaries, and he's opening things up for that Central Catholic offense. And there's absolutely no ego from that kid about, any potential lack of touches on a given week or anything like that, because he has the wholesale focus of opposing secondaries. He's getting bracketed. He's getting double team, triple team. So he's having everything thrown at him as a senior, and he's handling it really well. And that is something that has garnered some praise as well.
Good stuff from that group. And I just want to quickly finish here, Tyler, on basketball recruiting, because kind of lost along the way here. And you can understand it's the middle of the season, that the team's unbeaten and they've got a really good thing going from the recruiting trail. But Penn State basketball picked up a commitment, and this was one that was very far out of the region.
Yeah, Dom Stewart, he's playing his ball out, and he's out at Southern California Academy now. I believe that's in Castaic, Cali. I don't know where exactly in the state that is, but it's out west no matter how you slice it. So he's over in a different time zone now, but he's a Baltimore native, and that's what played into that, because Jamal Brunt had a really big role in this recruitment, and he did a really good job. And I think this was the first opportunity for Penn State fans to get a look at his recruiting chops in the region, with Stewart being one of those DMV guys. And when Rhodes was hired from VCU and brought Brunt over with him, we lauded his reputation in the DMV and his relationship with a lot of the AAU coaches in the region. Just the fact that he is very well respected throughout the DMV, and I think that showed here. When it comes to what Stewart adds to Penn State's backcourt, I think it's another solid foundational piece to go along with Jalvin Carter. I think those two play off each other nicely. First of all, I think these are two guard gets for Mike Rhodes and company, where you don't have to worry about the skill sets overlapping. Carter and Stewart do different things, and they do different things well. So Penn State will have some versatility in its backcourt with these two additions. And with Stewart, he can really shoot the rock. That is something that has been praised by multiple sources who are familiar with his game. And he can stroke it. And that's something that Penn State is really excited about. They've praised his basketball IQ as well. And as a combo guard, that's notable because he's not necessarily always on the ball. He moves very well off the ball, finds himself in positions open where he gets himself open, moving around off the ball, coming off screens, things of that nature. So there's a lot of excitement about Stewart. He might not be the most highly ranked prospect in the 2024 class, but Penn State feels that his skill set plays with what Rhodes wants to accomplish offensively in State College. And when you're looking at your recruiting board and you're building that recruiting board, you can't really ask for much more from a potential two-guard get. Now, beyond Stewart, there's still the desire to add in 2024. And we just saw Matthew Hodd from Belmar, St. Rose in New Jersey. He was a top target for the Nittany Lions in the front court. He goes off the board to Villanova. So that kind of, that's a disappointment for Penn State. There was some positive feedback coming out of Hodge's official visit. That occurred during the first weekend of September. He was actually on campus for his official at the same time as Dominic Stewart. And it seemed like the Nittany Lions made a move up Hodge's list coming out of that visit, but always got the sense that this was going to be a Maryland-Villanova battle. That's ultimately how it played out with the Wildcats getting that commitment. So beyond Hodge, you have David Punch from Texas still on the board, 6'7" forward from Harker Heights. He's actually a Boston native. That recruitment is trending more towards TCU right now. I actually have a crystal ball pick in for the Horned Frogs to get that one done. Another situation where I think Penn State did do a good job with Punch on his official visit, and he told me as much when I got the chance to catch up with him. The staff did a really good job, and Brent Scott has done a really good job recruiting him. But there's a lot of pull from TCU at this point, and the option to stay in Texas is an intriguing one to him. So Punch, go on.
I appreciate the Punch update. You beat me to the punch, pun intended there. I was going to bring up what's next, and he was the name at the top of that list. And if you have any others, feel free, but don't feel like you got to make this a basketball segment. I just wanted to finish up with some thoughts on it.
Yeah, I kind of got rolling there, to be completely honest with you. I got excited. We don't get to talk basketball recruiting often.
People might not realize, people might have it pop in their head on the podcast. We do cover basketball and basketball recruiting. Wait till you see Daniel and Mark go to work on the basketball beat this winter. And Tyler, whenever there's basketball recruiting to discuss, he's on top of it. He was all over this commitment from across the country well before it actually went public. So, Tyler, we appreciate that perspective. Anything else to add on the basketball front?
Miles Goodman was on campus for an official visit, during Whiteout weekend. Haven't gotten the chance to catch up with him coming out of that, but the feedback has been positive. He's teammates with Dom Stewart at Southern California Academy now, so we're kind of just have to see where that one goes. He's a little bit on the quieter side, but that would be an intriguing front court option for Penn State at this point in the cycle. So we're going to have to see how that one plays out.
Yeah, Mike Rhodes went all over the place to put his roster together for 2023. Most of that done during the transfer portal. We'll see if he has a pipeline brewing in Southern California all of a sudden, Tyler. We'll keep tabs on Penn State basketball. Of course, first and foremost, we've got another home game. We're working our way towards October 14th, which means more prospects on campus. So as we get confirmations for the UMass matchup, Tyler, Brian Doan and company will have us covered. And just know this, Brian Doan put it on the record, Tyler, just so it's out there. Last time he was on last week, he said that Michigan matchup, if Penn State's unbeaten, that he thinks even with the noon kick on a Saturday, it's going to be a bigger recruiting event than what we saw for the Whiteout. So it could be a busy times ahead for the football recruiting. I know it always is busy, but we may not have seen our biggest in-season event, even though the Whiteout is behind us now.
And let me say this on the record as well. He's 100% right, especially if Penn State is unbeaten. I mean, you are looking at a potential just huge weekend. It doesn't get much bigger than the Whiteout, but this is one of those instances where it easily can be bigger than the Whiteout. And you know me, man. I'm looking forward to that. I'm hoping that comes together.
Yeah, well, $1, 4 quarters, 10 dimes, 100 pennies gets you 2 months of access at Lions247.com. And as Daniel Gallen mentioned in our last segment, that takes you through the Big Ten championship game in Indianapolis, in case you were wondering, and takes us right on the doorstep of the early signing period in December. So jump on that deal. It will expire on Thursday at midnight. So $1 for 2 months of VIP access at Lions247.com. Tyler Calvaruso, appreciate everything you do for us on the podcast, at the site. Talk to you real soon.
Thanks for having me back, man.
All right. Good stuff from all of my colleagues at Lions247.com. Tyler, Mark, Daniel. We've got a lot cooking right now, even during a bye week at Lions247.com. So be sure to head over, check things out. Feedback and commentary from all these coordinator conversations that got bunched up on us on a Tuesday afternoon. Manny Diaz, Stacey Collins, Mike Yursich, and then Chuck Losey, who was fantastic in giving us the lowdown on a lot of what is going on for player development behind the scenes, specifically for younger members of this roster. You'll find all that and much more at Lions247.com. We're back on Thursday. We're going to do a bit of a bye week roundtable, sort through some topics that are at the forefront of the list and wondering what's next for these 5-0 Nittany Lions. We'll also have a special guest on Thursday. I think you people will be very happy about who it is. We'll be back in a couple days. For now, stepping aside, I'm Tyler Donahue. Thanks as always for listening to the Lions 24/7 podcast.